not using the camera for Zoom now.
Do you know how to set that up? The caret by the joint audio or your audio button.
Yeah, oh, that, okay, maybe that's it.
There should be a
Yeah.
video settings.
Meeting owl camera, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, right on time at 6:25. We have tonight's meeting of the Capital Planning Committee of Monday, February 13th, 2023, here at the Ritter Memorial Building. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast. Well, it's not broadcast live, it's being recorded. And we'll be on Facebook, we'll be on Lunenburg Access YouTube after the conclusion of the meeting. It is not being streamed live. If you want to join, this is Zoom webinar ID 816-6285-6491. If you want to join by phone, the number is 888-475-4499. Once again, the webinar ID is 816-6285-6491. The agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at tonight's meeting, or those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by the open meeting law. So that is the call to order of the committee. We have 4 members in attendance. Mr. Beardmore, Mr. Passios, Mr. Martin, and myself. I'm on the chair. Absent is Mr. Brenner. So first I would go to public comment. If there's any public comment from the Capital Planning Committee members. Any public comment from the public? Okay. We have approval of meeting minutes from December 14th. I checked with Amanda. She had not realized that we had the short meeting of the 28th, so we don't have those ready. And I did tell her about tonight's meeting, so after this is completed, then she'll review this one too. But anyway, we do have the minutes of December 14th, 2022. Has everybody received them and read them?
I think I received them some time ago and read them, but I did not read them recently, but I don't recall having any issues with them.
One of the things I've made a point to read them when they come through, otherwise I forget to go
Right.
back to them, so.
I move to approve the minutes of December 14th.
2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? None, it passes unanimously. Okay, so we have, as we said we would, this meeting was after the town manager presented the capital plan to the finance committee and the select board, that we would meet and see if we had any further discussion on that presentation. I can put that presentation up if we need to. Probably should. Of course, that means I have to go through a whole bunch of things here again. All right, so let's share the where is, we should share the screen. Let's just, oh no, I don't have it up here. Okay, hold on. In order for me to do this, I have to make me.
If you wanna make me host, I can share it. But this helpful. Co-host or whatever.
Sure, I can make you a host.
Oh, right, then just let me do it anyway.
I want to make you co-host.
There we go. I just shared.
Okay, there we go.
All right.
So if you get rid of your sidebar, I'm just making it a full screen.
It's easy for you to say. How do I do that?
That's okay. I mean, we can see. it. We can see it.
It's the little icon of the two.
Oh, this one?
Yeah, the button, no, the red, the blue button all the way next to the landscape mode in the upper left.
This one?
Yeah, next to that, the blue, the tab, yeah, that.
Yeah, not so much.
Oh. Okay, that usually closes it.
I don't know.
Okay. So let's, I don't know where people want to start. This is not a full-fledged presentation by the town manager. So, we can start with projects by,
Which slide would you like to go to, Madam Town Manager?
If you want to start with the 6 that I presented as part of the plan.
This
yeah,
one?
so let's go to 7, yeah, so let's start there.
Okay.
So this is the presentation and
It
it's,
should be 10, I think. Slide 10.
oh, okay,
Yes,
there we go.
Yes.
okay.
So these are the 6 items that the town manager has recommended on the capital plan. As you see there, so the fire replacement rescue 1, the exterior doors and security upgrades, 2 projects at the Turkey Hill Elementary School. Primary school security upgrades and the 2 6-wheel dump truck spreader plowers. If you want to talk a little bit about the amount, why you stopped there.
Right, so if anyone's watched my presentation or attended, the reasoning is at this point in time, reserving recommendation to use any free cash budget, including the capital plan. So given that is a primary source of funding for our capital plan, typically, the raise and appropriate amount is a 356,789, and that also ties into where we are currently with our budget and not having a state aid number and level funding that from the fiscal 23 state aid amount at this point. And recognizing that 3 of these items would qualify under the special purpose stabilization fund to recommend use of those funds for these items.
Heather, do you have a feel, and I know you can't absolutely answer this question right now, because this thing will be fluid for quite a while. Going forward until a number of things get settled. But if the rescue is funded by ARPA funding, at this point, do you just intend to not take that amount out of the special purpose stabilization fund?
Correct.
And
So
not add any more projects, or
at
a
this,
combination of both?
right, at this point, it wouldn't change my recommendation. So if any funds were used on any of these items from ARPA, my recommendation would remain the same at this point in time. There are no further projects down the list that would qualify under the special purpose stabilization fund, besides the ambulance and the 2 large dump trucks.
Okay, that makes sense. So that money would stay in that account rather than being pulled because you could have alternate funding source. Okay.
It's not to say, like as in years prior, if funding sources become available, that it'll go down the list as far as what's available for funding towards
Right.
capital.
And I think that was part of the questioning at the finance committee meeting the other night as to, why are there no free cash dollars in here? And again, it's early in the process. Well, it's
A typical year.
right,
So-
exactly. There's always something delaying something in the budget process,
There's a lot being delayed.
but there's a lot being delayed this year for very well known reasons.
You had outlined, I think on Thursday at the finance committee meeting, that you anticipated that you will have a conservative estimate of what will be needed to,
For the overlay.
for the overlay
Mhm.
account. Or additional funds needed for the overlay account, I guess. would be the right
Yes.
way to put it.
Mhm.
And I know that there's a lot that needs to be figured out to determine that estimate, and I don't wanna jump the gun on what the estimate is. But assuming for a moment that that doesn't expend all of our free cash. Have you put any thought to? Does the prioritization change as opposed to previous years, or how you might think about applying fiscal policy given the current circumstance? So, for example, money to stabilization or to OPEB, or, the various other places well, really, those are the two, that capital, that free cash goes. Have you put any thought to, perhaps would be a year to not fund those as we have in previous years, but instead, direct disproportionately more to capital, or not?
So I've looked at what our stabilization balances are and meeting our thresholds for minimum balances in there. We are at a level where we wouldn't have to deposit money into that account. Not to say that I wouldn't recommend we continue to do so. I would prefer to continue to do our minimum contribution to OPEB because we're obviously nowhere near funding that to its level it needs to be fully funded. And capital will also, what will come into play is what we receive in state aid and how that affects the budget and what's available for funding there, because typically we spend more out of our annual operating budget too on capital. So I would like to see more in the operating budget spent
Okay,
on capital as well.
okay,
So there's kind of moving pieces.
yeah, I think that's fair, but you understand
Mhm.
the logic of maybe this wouldn't be the year to put
Yes,
$100,000 into stabilization or something, given
Right.
where we're at from a capital perspective.
that's why I looked at where we are at with our stabilization.
Yeah.
accounts.
Um,
And I obviously wouldn't recommend either if we're gonna be spending out of special purpose to deposit money into it. It makes no
right, yeah, well, that's
logical sense.
a fair point as well. Okay, I think, it is what it is for now.
But how much did you recommend in FY 23, you remember what the bottom line was?
It was 2.162 or
About 800 to $900,000.
Yeah, and until a few months ago, a couple months ago, if you looked at all of the indicators, it
Yeah.
would have been right in that neighborhood or a little bit more than that
Yeah.
this year. But we're not.
Let's see. Go to the rest of the list, just so we see the prioritizations of the rest of the list here.
the slide 18.
Yeah, once we get this up, it's gonna take a chunk of money to get down more than one more slot.
Right.
Because the next one is a sizable dollar.
There's two, yeah,
Two in a
so,
row.
so we've got a 287 and a 242, so,
Right.
there's more than $500,000 right there.
So these are the town manager's priority ratings versus this committee's. So, for the most part, like I said, at the select board meeting, when town manager presented this, there were a few I had, when they have big jumps, I have questions. Some I've already asked town manager. Like the headstone reserve, her priority 15 was our 19. And our 17 is her 13. And those explanations, I don't know if you
Yeah,
want
I
to
can
touch.
provide that.
Yeah, that's primarily what I'm interested to hear is the logic here.
Yep.
So I'd say, like, first and foremost, like the committee, I looked at these from a public safety lens first. making sure that we're addressing any safety issues, liability issues. And then looking towards the priorities of each of the departments and affiliated boards, committees. And so, for instance, I rated the Northfield Culvert Survey Design project a little higher. I see that as a safety issue. It's the only infrastructure project we have on the plan this year as well. So if we don't get in the queue to do that work for the construction at a subsequent year, I think that further delays any infrastructure upgrades there. The sidewalk repair at TC Pasio is another one that you might wonder. We've done, the DPW has repaired a portion of the sidewalk where there was a gaping hole, I think, where it was a safety issue. I see those sidewalks being used all the time by all different ages of people. So I look at that as a liability issue to repair those sidewalks that are in constant use. The Parks Whalum Lake Marshall Pond treatment, they rated that project as a higher priority than the McNally Park survey. And part of the reason is that the weeds have been, especially for the town beach, been a constant issue, and seeing that becoming more of a customer satisfaction issue and use of the town beach. So it could potentially impact revenues, the town beach, if less people are inclined to go there because it's less suitable to swim. The headstone restoration project, the cemetery commission and the cemetery superintendent, both in agreement that would be their highest priority over the turf restoration project. So that's a priority level for that. Yes, capital planning committee meeting, the turf restoration project, I foresee as potentially impacting the operating budget. So I'd want further research on the potential impacts to the operating budget on staff, staffing needs.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The turf restoration,
Okay.
so an impact on the
Yeah.
operating budget.
I will take this opportunity to say, and this is frustrating for the committee, it was frustrating for me last year, it's frustrating for me this year. When they make presentations to us, if they change their priority after their recommendations, that's frustrating for us. Because it's data that we could have known. Like, they're the ones who came to us saying, we want the headstones and we want the turf, so we evaluate them. Nowhere in that presentation did the DPW director on their behalf or the cemetery commission on their own tell us that, oh no, we want to do the headstones first, because that would have affected my reasoning. Like, I'm trying to present things and prioritize them the way that the people who present them to us prioritize them. So when I hear that they're talking to you and say, oh no, we'd much rather do one than the other, I'll be like, okay, well, it would be nice to know that.
Right.
Tom,
I think the
honestly-
thing.
We
Separated
had
out.
that conversation in this meeting. I have a message to the town manager saying that, in my recollection, we had intended those to be flipped. But I'd have to go back and listen to the meeting.
I know that the town manager said, not that it came from the cemetery commission.
No,
It came from the town manager saying that she wanted the headstones because she mentioned the turf being an operating budget
Right,
impact, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing now is that the cemetery commission themselves wanted that. I didn't get that, and maybe I'm incorrect. It's.
I honestly don't
It's an
remember. I remember Bill
unstable
Tyler
connection.
having
I
that
don't know
meeting.
what's
I
going on
don't
with this laptop.
remember.
Yeah. I know they had a meeting afterwards and discussed it, and I'm assuming they reached out to you since.
Yeah, I recall the discussion around the order of headstones versus turf.
Of this list,
I don't recall how it was.
anything above 4 changes draws my attention. And when it gets to 6, when it comes to the senior center parking lot, Like, that's the one I can honestly say I do disagree with the change in the ranking, the moot point.
You wanna?
The senior
speak to
center
that?
parking lot. Agree that we're probably not gonna get down to that level of spending. I do see it as a higher priority need than the Ritter building, floor covering, replace everything below there. So that's why I prioritized it higher than those other items.
So,
Again, a safety issue, proximity to the building, access to the future ADA, compliant area behind the senior center.
have there been any further developments in terms of the site there or the planning or anything, or was pretty much where we were back? No,
Regarding the parking,
yeah,
only conceptually, like adding additional parking along Memorial,
which we had discussed as a
yeah.
potential augment or alternative.
Right, besides that, you know, we're trying to move forward with the area behind senior center. Are there any other questions?
Can you move your mouse?
It's not, it's, the problem is with that. laptop. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It is still sharing on Zoom for whomever might be watching or for the video. Yeah, I guess I don't have any serious problems with really any of this. The senior center parking lot issue, having rated that at or near the bottom, is in my mind, we hadn't really resolved that whole area, and the development of that area had been fully talked through, and that the select board was on board, and that the drainage was there, and that the dollar amount was actually gonna cover the totality of the project. Given the estimation that had been made at the time and the questions that had been asked throughout our process. So, you know, my thinking on that project has been not necessarily the need, but the completeness of the
Right,
project.
well, that's exactly what we had decided, that's what we had decided, and I agree.
And in my mind, none of that having changed, I guess I'm still of the same mind that I was previously. But I understand your reasoning in terms of the usefulness and the safety aspect of it and all that. Like, you know, if you took out the completeness of the project in the conceptualization of it, if you took that out, then I think you'd be, in fact, I might even, you know, rank it higher than you did, you know, but I have a really hard time separating those two issues. Which is kind of why my head is still kind of where it is, but I understand your reasoning. You know, the other issues, you know, from a school department perspective, you know, I mean, some have gone up in priority, a couple have gone down. I think, you know, on the whole, we're pretty much even to where we were. I think you know, as I said back in December, I can't rectify in my own head how we can put McNally Field ahead of the high school, middle school turf. I've gone through it in my head 100 times and I just can't do it.
Yeah.
You've changed the priority, but you actually haven't changed the order that this committee landed on. So I can't find fault there either. You in fact improved the priorities of those two. So, you know, on the whole, I think I don't, there's nothing here that I would put up a massive fight over, right? I might quibble with one or two in the direction that they're in, but I understand the logic.
Well, that's good to hear, because I don't think anybody has the resources for a massive fight. So it's good.
The oxygen has been sufficiently sucked out of the room.
Have there the earmarks been, the projects for earmarks been submitted to our legislative team?
No, we have that meeting on March 7th.
March 7th. Okay, I'm just wondering, is there anything in the capital plan that's gonna be part of those suggested requests?
It's not a discussion we've had yet even, but that we naturally turn to where as part of my recommendation,
Yeah.
turn to that
In
capital.
the past you have,
Mhm.
yeah. I just, in the back of my mind, the school security projects, I mean, politically, those could be a big nut for politicians. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'll tell you what would be very helpful, and that's the next one on the list that's not funded. You know,
The fire alarm
Oh,
system,
yeah.
yeah,
this is a school
right.
and fire alarm. I think if you put those together and you talk to your state legislators, I think all of a sudden, you know, it may actually get some
Yeah,
attention.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, as I explained in the finance committee meeting, the issue with that system, as I see it, is that while that particular system has kind of gone up in terms of its visibility because we had a critical failure in September of this past year, it's actually one of a handful of pacing items in that building,
Mhm.
any of which could go down at any
Oh,
point,
yeah.
right? So,
Right.
and to the, you know, the finance committee requested of the school committee, you know, can you come back to us and tell us what your contingency plan is? And the sad reality is that there is no contingency plan, right? We've asked our facilities director, Mr. Pusateri, to come back with a get healthy plan for Turkey Hill, largely as a response to the building committee's work and their deprioritization of a major renovation or replacement of Turkey Hill. Okay, well, if we were to take all the other stuff that you're gonna deal with TC Passios and Ritter and Town Hall, do that as a debt exclusion, but maybe we focus capital planning resources on Turkey Hill. What's that punch list and what is a reasonable plan of dealing with that building? The fire alarm system is very high, but the heat and electric and plumbing are not far behind it, right? So that's just kind of the nature of that building. And we did, get lucky with finding a new old stock panel for that alarm system, but we don't know what's gonna go next, right?
Right.
I think we gotta, as well, keep in mind, usually our earmarks are no more than
Right,
100,000.
that's a big number.
So,
Right.
we wanna approach our requests that way.
I've always been, if you don't ask for it, you're never gonna get it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, the answer, right, you don't ask, the answer is definitely no.
Yeah,
Yes.
So I have received, probably just because people that I know in town, I found myself in a couple of conversations in the last month or two. And I think we even may have received an email on McNally Park, from the president of the youth baseball. It's no longer Little League, it's youth baseball now. And one of the topics, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but in terms of managing our parks assets, is the topic of Powell Field, which has just come up because of the vandalism that occurred there over the course of the late fall or early winter. Is there a plan to deal with that? Like, are we gonna have baseball on that field?
We're
This
in
year?
discussions, yeah, in
Okay.
the parks.
Oh, this is a person who drove a vehicle and tore it up.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and it's pretty substantial damage to the outfield of Powell Field.
That probably is gonna come up at their meeting tomorrow night. Not to Wednesday night.
Wednesday night, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, Marshall Park, yeah, it's the newer of the
Yeah.
two new, well, they put them at the same time, but
Yeah.
the backfields in Marshall Park.
Barring an update as a member of the committee, all I'm aware of so far is they were still trying to figure out what it's gonna take to repair it. And the challenge is that whatever's done is gonna be complete and safe. It's not a bubble gum repair and then let the kids play on the
Yeah.
field because there's too much liability.
Yeah,
So it could go either way. It could be the fields.
anyway, I know it's not, but it's
Yeah.
come up as, anyway.
And our budget's already blown, so.
Yeah, we gotta figure that out.
Anybody have any other questions about the rest of the planning.
You know,
There's no commitment, obviously, until we take a vote as the select board, but obviously it seemed favorable for the ARPA funds because of the timing of putting the orders in. So we'll see the final vote next week, which we don't have a meeting tomorrow. Right, next week,
Right.
yeah, so.
I was just gonna make the comment that in
trucks.
retrospect.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I think I
That's-
would have
that's what
pushed
we-
for a couple of the infrastructure projects, small dollar amounts to be pushed up higher in the list to, as the town manager mentioned before, the culverts. You put off the engineering of 25,000 or $30,000 on a culvert, you're looking at 2 to 3 years down the road before your dip in the road gets fixed.
Mhm.
We did that, Tom, was it last year?
Did what?
We actually initially, in our discussions, prioritized things like that. Engineering for projects that were gonna be multi-year, especially small amounts, we tended to push them into our medium to high priority.
Part of, right, I mean, but I think we talked about.
That was
this
part of
year
the Collins scoring.
too. Yeah, part of this year too.
Yeah,
So if something takes 2 years to get to, you wanna make sure that you don't wait for the whole amount, you get the engineering part, so you have it done, right?
right.
So on the, just to kind of loop back to the ARPA question for whatever it's worth, probably isn't worth much, but, you know. I think that there is particular value in accelerating the ordering of the ambulance. Even more so now than it was the last time we talked about this a couple of months ago.
Yeah, that's what.
Because we have another ambulance off the road.
That's what the discussion
Yes,
is. At the previous, 2 weeks ago. The last
Yeah.
meeting I was at, the discussion.
But that being said, the way this is, the way we're thinking of this, the way the town manager is thinking of this, which I agree with. Is that if you take ARPA funds and you put it toward an ambulance, that doesn't knock anything, you know, it doesn't knock us further down the list on the capital plan because we're using special purpose stabilization funds effectively for that purpose right now anyway. And in my view, it's kind of unfortunate because my understanding all along, I've said this many times now, is that special purpose stabilization fund, in my mind, has always been about really fire trucks and ambulances, right? Like, that's really the way it's always been talked about in the narrative at town meeting, is fire trucks are $1 million, ambulances are $500,000. We need to save our pennies to buy these, so we don't have to do regular borrowing for them, ergo special purpose stabilization fund. Sanders and snowplows never really entered my mind in terms of the purpose for the special purpose stabilization fund. I understand why we're using it and I don't oppose it. But as I think about moving down the list and, you know, spending fewer dollars from the special purpose stabilization fund, I have a hard time rectifying that in my mind, where now we're not spending the money on an ambulance, but we're spending it on 2 plow trucks and Sanders.
Well, for way different circumstances.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And there is discussion, and we don't know the viability, the question was asked, at least, I would say. About if we commit the ARPA funds to get the order placed. And in such time that we actually have to pay, we actually have town meeting commit the special purpose. We would recoup, is there a way to recoup the ARPA funds? So we can
Right.
use the ARPA funds as a commitment, saying, we're gonna pay for it
We're
here.
not using.
And then when we actually come to pay for it, use the specialization and then use the ARPA fund for something else. So
But
like that-
you've got to have that happen before the deadline for commitment of ARPA funds.
Yeah, that's,
You're,
but that ARPA
That's a
fund
couple years
commitment is 2 years.
Heather,
Yeah.
24, not 26.
24 and
2 years.
fully expended by 26.
2 calendar years,
Calendar year 20.
not the end of this year, the end of next year.
December 30th.
So we'll have a town meeting, we'll actually have 2 town meetings before then, so we have time. The real question is, can it be
Can
done?
you-
And we don't know. So that's what we're looking-
The other issue that came up around the prioritization at the finance committee meeting, which I think was a really good question by Mr. Waters, is, and in fact, I got the details wrong in the answer that I gave, but I think ultimately come to the same place on this, which is you've got 7 trucks of similar makeup in the highway department, big honking plows with Sanders. And you currently have 3 in working condition. You have 2 on back order, and you have 2 that you're gonna order again in July, which in all likelihood, you're not gonna see until sometime in 2025. Would it make sense to flip? If all things remain equal and we could not afford to move down on this list because of overlay and all this other stuff going on with the tax code, would it make sense to flip the fire alarm system with the second sander that we have on the list for the capital plan for FY 24? Given that you're not gonna, best case scenario, you're not gonna see that sander for 2 years anyway. And when that thing shows up, we're still gonna have 3 times as many, or twice as many Sanders as we have today. So I'm not saying that that's the right course, but I do think that it raises an interesting question. You know, given the reality of when we're gonna see the value for this money and the risks that we're encumbering with the fire alarm and the other systems at Turkey Hill. I don't know, these things were 2 and 3 on my priorities list, so, you know, I can't say that I would definitively flip them, but I do think that it's a fair question to ask.
I do think it's a fair question, but I don't know that it's a fair question. I don't know that it's something we can kind of come to now, this late in the game. I mean, we have to, the time I was gonna put together a budget.
Yeah.
We have other extenuating circumstances in town, otherwise we would have made it to number 7 or 8.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm hopeful that we're gonna get there.
Well,
You're not.
From your, I don't, to be very honest, no, I'm not pessimistic about it. I really have no clue how it's gonna turn out. I really don't.
So I have a question. The ambulance services, doesn't that generate income back into the general fund?
It goes in, local receipts, that's accounted for in our local receipts number.
Okay,
Yes.
is that
So
Is that number significant enough to kind of raise an ambulance higher or lower? Does that? Or,
What's number 1? How much higher can it?
no, I'm just asked, just in general.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
is that something that goes into your thinking along with public safety? I mean,
As
does
far
it,
as generating,
does it almost pay for itself over time?
no,
No, not close, huh?
no.
Barely covers our operating costs.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know what it brings in a year.
The chief gave
I
us,
think around 240 or something.
That's it?
So, yeah, okay.
I mean, the general run is like $1,400, $1,200.
not on paper.
Yeah, they get-
But what insurance pays,
They get about 600 from the insurance
Right.
company.
they can bill amount that they only
The
receive.
chief did a presentation to the finance committee a few years ago.
No, I
It was
remember
not,
this.
it was not.
It doesn't say for it.
Yeah, okay, all right, yeah.
And anyway, that wouldn't, the fact that it brought in or didn't bring in revenue wouldn't raise it any higher than the fact that it saves lives.
Right.
In the town that you live, that would raise it to the highest level to
Right,
me to
right,
begin with.
right. I agree.
Any other questions about this?
No, not at this point.
Nope.
Like I said, it's gonna be a fluid.
Yeah.
Document for quite a
Well, we're
while.
gonna know because again, the whole abatement process is an open, you know, it's publicly available data. So presumably, we're going to hear as they go what they're abating. And there's no secrecy behind.
Yeah,
abatement.
I mean, so at the finance committee meeting last week, Tom Baelish, you know, he basically said the part out loud, right? He said, okay, well, if you take 428 abatement applications and you multiply by 2,000,
Right,
right? Which I think, you know, the average increase is about 3,500 or something. So let's say you say 2,000 is your average abatement. Well, now you're, you know, at about $850,000, right? Like that. So not to say that that's the high or the low or the middle, because who knows?
Right.
Right? But it's probably not 4 million. You know,
Right.
you know, it's probably some number between 500,000 and 1.5 million, you know.
Which is, I think, the number that I personally, I don't want to speak for anybody else in this process. For my personally, that's the number, that's the range, I've been maybe tightening in the top and tightening.
Yeah,
in the bottom,
yeah.
But in that range, yes.
But like I said, at the finance committee, I'm gonna give the worst case scenario.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, you have to, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a town that, what is our overlay usually, 150,000,
120,
120,000?
Yeah, we actually-
It's gonna be a
actually reduced it last
tad
year.
over that.
the assessors did, they
Yeah,
raised it on the recap.
Yeah.
That's the amount.
So,
Heather, did you say once that money is appropriated, it stays there unless the assessors deem it?
It takes a
Excess.
vote of the assessors to release it.
Okay, and if they
or hopefully
don't before
surplus.
the end of the fiscal year, what happens to the money? It's just.
It carries over.
Take care of it. Okay, so it's-
which is a change, right? That's a change.
The change is that, it used to be that every year you appropriated funds for that particular year
Yeah.
for abatements and exemptions. And they changed that law, so the money is all combined
Right.
into one fund.
Right, which is better, I think.
Yeah.
to do it that way.
I think that was probably part of, the municipal, when they reviewed a lot of different laws and.
Kind of becomes a stabilization fund, more or less.
Mhm.
It's great until you have a spike like we just had. It doesn't do you much good. Well, I guess I'd rather have 280 something or whatever it is than 120, right? So we've got more than I thought we had with my limited understanding of it a couple of months ago. So anyway, all right.
anybody else?
My other comments can be answered.
Okay, good.
I'm good.
All right, so,
Do we need to take action or we just, no?
well, we're just, the only thing on the minutes, so just an open discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, all right, so any public comment from the public?
Oh, I just have a question.
Well, first you have to do the usual introduction of yourself.
Oh, sorry, Rhonda Lithia, 181 Reservoir Road. I just have a question regarding, Turkey Hill. Now, I've heard at the school committee meetings that they're thinking of renovating it enough to get through like 10 to 15 years. Is that seems to be, what they've been talking about. So I'm just curious about how in-depth these renovations will be. And is it going to affect, like, will it make it a situation where we have to move all the cameras and all the things that we're adding on, or disturb the new entrance, or?
No. No, so the thinking behind this, Rhonda, is that it's really about extending the life of the building to a point where the town's finances, if we were to go down the path that we appear to be going on with the municipal building committee around TCP, this building, town hall, that's more or less going to expend the majority of our borrowing capacity for the next, let's say, 10 years. So we are not going to have the financial capability of actually doing a renovation or replacement to Turkey Hill inside of that period of time, but we still have to educate kids. And we have systems in that building that are at or beyond their anticipated lifespan. So the question is, what can we do through planned capital spending to extend the life of that building so that it continues to operate more or less as it does now for at least another 10 to 15 years. That's the logic. The plan associated with that is yet to surface. So that's something that Mr. Pusateri is working on, and I've been told is going to surface at a school committee meeting soon. So the details, subject to the questions that you've asked, none of that has really surfaced yet. But I would say that the kinds of impacts that you're suggesting around, like, would it negate the benefit of some of the investments we're making now? I would say very unlikely, to almost zero chance, based on the conversations that I've been involved in at this point. But we'll know more, we will know more soon and. We'll figure out what's feasible and what's not.
Thank you.
Any public comment from the committee members? No, I want to thank you all for coming to
Thank
the
you for
meeting,
doing the meeting.
and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Before we do, are we meeting again to put together a?
Oh, I know what I wanted to bring up, yeah, so there was the idea of the report. And because of the extra, me being on this investigation team, is there anybody who's willing to put together a report on behalf of the committee?
And I could write something down.
Okay, that I would be most appreciative.
It'll be very short.
Short is, brevity is the soul of wit, as they say, so.
I think that the challenge of a report. Is we can certainly report out our priorities list.
Yeah.
We would probably need to talk about how that appears in the warrant relative to the town manager's recommendation. Because I don't think that recommendation is going to become a thing until right before the warrant
Well, I think,
gets printed, right?
I think you write the written, my recommendation would be you write the written part of what we did and what we discussed. And the chart that the town manager put in her presentation that shows our priority and her priority is the one that the town looks at, and then you can see what both committee and the town manager.
Yeah,
came up
I think that's fair. I think the difference is that we don't normally put in the warrant the stuff that's below the line. Right? We don't have typically the town manager puts just the funded lines in the warrant.
with. Right,
So,
that's fine, so I said, I think what we'll do.
okay,
I just need the narrative, and if you can put together the
Yeah,
narrative, I
yeah.
would be greatly
sure.
appreciative.
Yeah,
Is that what you wanted to bring up? Because I kind of hijacked that, I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just want to make sure we came back around to that as to whether
Yeah,
we
no,
were
glad
going
you
to
brought
do
it
it in another
I
meeting.
mean,
or-
presumably, we have to have another meeting. to
It should be
approve
fairly
the minutes.
non-controversial.
A short meeting just to approve.
yeah, so that should be fairly non-controversial.
Yeah, well, until we do what the finance
Yeah,
committee
yeah.
approval committee does, which is that the chair pre-writes the minutes, because we're just doing interviews and we approve things, we can sign them that day, which is a little bit awkward, but certainly saves another meeting.
All right,
So now I would take a motion to adjourn.
Some
Do I have a second?
second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
I
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Years ago, there was some discussions on replacing money.
Hold on, Louise, stop the recording here.
Is that ever resurfaced?